David and Jonathan from 1 Samuel 18, 19, and 20. Jonathan? Who's Jonathan? Well, let's find out. Have you ever met someone who was a hero? Oh, that's so special to meet someone who is a hero. Well, David was a hero. He had just killed Israel's biggest enemy and had caused a great victory for the Israelite army. Remember who that big enemy was? That's right, Goliath. He trusted God and did what King Saul should have done. That made David a big hero. As David talked with King Saul after the battle, it seems that Prince Jonathan was there listening to him. Oh, Jonathan! Prince Jonathan? Well, Jonathan was King Saul's son. David's courage and trust in God to win the battle made a big impression on Jonathan, Saul's son. The Bible says, "And it came to pass, when he had made an end of speaking unto Saul, that the soul of Jonathan was knit with the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul." After becoming a hero, David stayed at the palace. He didn't go home to tend sheep anymore. David also was a palace musician. He played music for Saul whenever he was asked. David and Jonathan probably hunted together and practiced sword work together and had lots of fun. They were great friends. David must have been like the brother Jonathan always wanted to have. Jonathan loved David so much that he wanted them to be friends forever. He wanted David to know that he considered David part of his family. So Jonathan made a covenant with David. Oh, what is a covenant? Well, a covenant is a promise so serious that it's the same as a legal agreement. It's not supposed to be broken. And then, to celebrate these promises, Jonathan took his princely robe, his tunic, his belt, and even his sword, and gave these royal things made especially for him to David. Remember, Jonathan would have become king of Israel. Whenever your father was the king, when your father died, you were supposed to become king, and that would have made Jonathan becoming king after Saul. But God had already told Saul that he and his family would no longer rule. Jonathan loved God, and he accepted God's decision instead of trying to do things his own way as Saul had done. So Jonathan had accepted the fact that his family was not going to be kings anymore. And David, well, he was just a nobody, and he knew it. But everything David did, he did well, and everyone loved him. And the Bible says, "And it came to pass, as they came, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistine Goliath, that the women came out of all cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tabrets, with joy, and with instruments of music. And the women answered one another as they played, and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. Well, that really annoyed Saul. He couldn't get it out of his mind that they said he had slain thousands, but David had slain tens of thousands. That meant they thought David was better than Saul. So Saul got more and more jealous of David, until it became murderous jealousy. Saul commanded that anyone who saw David should kill him. Oh, no! Jonathan immediately stood up for David, and then went to warn David to hide. He talked with his father to try to get Saul over his hatred, and for a while David then returned to the palace. But it wasn't long before Saul started trying to kill David himself. Once when David was playing on his harp for Saul, the king took his spear and threw it hard trying to pin David to the wall. Then David knew it was time to leave. So David escaped from Saul's murderous intentions. But after he'd been gone a while, David went to Jonathan. He asked, "Why does your father want to kill me? I'm only a step away from death." Jonathan agreed to talk with his father about David again. A special festival was coming up, and David would be expected to be there. So David and Jonathan made a plan. Jonathan would tell Saul that David had to go home. If Saul accepted Jonathan's words, they would take that as a sign that it was safe for David to come back. But if Saul got angry, they'd take it as a sign that it was not safe to be near Saul anymore. And Jonathan would let David know the answer by going out on the next day and shooting some arrows. If he shot an arrow beyond the boy who was sent to pick it up, it would mean that David needed to leave. So Jonathan did his part. When Saul saw David's seat empty and David was not there, Saul got furious. So furious that Saul hurled his spear at Jonathan. And so Jonathan knew it was time for David to go away for his own safety. Jonathan went out early the next morning for some archery practice. The Bible says, "And it came to pass in the morning that Jonathan went out into the field at the time appointed with David, and a little lad with him. And he said unto his lad, Run, find out now the arrows which I shoot. And as the lad ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. And when the lad was come to the place of the arrow which Jonathan had shot, Jonathan cried after the lad and said, Is not the arrow beyond thee? And Jonathan cried after the lad, Make speed, haste, stay not. And Jonathan's lad gathered up the arrows and came to his master. But the lad knew not anything. Only Jonathan and David knew the matter. Jonathan sent the boy away. David stepped out of hiding. He and Jonathan hugged and wept. The time of being best friends and brothers was over. But Jonathan said, Go in peace. We promise before God to be friends forever, and even our children are part of this promise. So the prince and the hero went their separate ways, sad but grateful to God that their friendship never had to end. Jonathan knew that if he helped David, he would never be king. But Jonathan also knew God had chosen David to be king. And Jonathan loved God just like David did. Loving God and putting him first was what made them best of best friends. Even when there was trouble, they remained friends. And here's our verse today, Proverbs 17:17. A friend loveth at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. Proverbs 17:17. Have you ever had a friend that said, I'm not going to be your friend anymore? Oh my, that is not a good friend. Because Proverbs 17:17 says, A friend loveth at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. Proverbs 17:17. A friend loves at all times, even in tough times. Even when things seem shaky, friends who both love God can stick together, just like a magnet makes those paper clips stick together. Friends who love and obey God together are the best kind of friends. I hope that you have friends that love God because they're the best kind of friends. Here's our big idea. When I put God first, I become a better friend. Now let's think about our lesson today. Jonathan was a prince, and David was a sheep herder. But they were very best friends. Even though Jonathan knew David would become king instead of him, Jonathan loved God and trusted God's plan. Jesus is our very best friend. Jesus is my best friend. I hope that he's your best friend too. He gave up his royal place in heaven for us. He died and rose again so we could join his royal family forever. Remember our verse today. A friend loveth at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. Proverbs 17:17. And our big idea? When I put God first, I become a better friend. So I pray that you will have good friends, best friends, and especially that you will choose friends that love God, because they're really going to be your best friends.
Slapstick Theater, David and Jonathan. This is Jonathan.
Hey!
Who was the son of King Saul and a warrior in Israel's army. This is David,
Hey!
who would later become the king of Israel.
Alright?
After David defeated a great giant, he was brought before King Saul and he met Jonathan. They immediately became friends,
Yeah!
and Jonathan made a pact with David and showed him that by giving David his robe and weapons.
Oh, hang
From that time on, David was successful in all he did,
on.
and King Saul became jealous of David and very angry. Saul wanted his servants and Jonathan to get rid of David, but because Jonathan loved his friend David, he warned David of what his father was planning.
Oh,
Jonathan went to his father, King Saul, and talked him out of harming David.
okay.
For a time, David was safe from King Saul's plans,
Phew.
but not long after, the king's jealousy and anger came back, and he tried to kill David.
Whoa!
David got away, and his friend Jonathan came to help him.
I got it.
Jonathan tried again to talk his father out of hurting David,
No.
but now King Saul was convinced he needed David to be gone. Jonathan was angry and sad that his father would not let his friend go, and he knew that David would have to go into hiding and run from King Saul. Jonathan met David one last time, and the two cried and said their goodbyes. Jonathan told David to go in peace and that they had a special bond in God's name. Then David left and lived a life on the run from King Saul, and Jonathan returned to the town. Even though they were separated, the two were the best of friends and were an encouragement to one another.
Yeah!
Who's your best friend? What would you do for your best friend? You might let your friend play with your favorite toys, or you might go to the park with your friends. Today's Bible story is about two best friends, David and Jonathan. Jonathan stuck by David no matter what.
David was a hero. He had killed Goliath, the mighty Philistine warrior, with just a sling and a stone. David lived at the king's palace. Jonathan, King Saul's son, became best friends with David. Jonathan gave him gifts, his robe, tunic, sword, bow, and belt.
Now Saul didn't love David like Jonathan. Saul was jealous of David and wanted to kill him. Jonathan warned David, "My father wants to kill you. Go hide until I can talk to him."
The next morning, Jonathan talked to Saul. "Why would you want to kill David?" Jonathan asked. "He has done nothing but help you." Saul promised not to kill David. Jonathan told David the good news, and David returned to serve Saul as he had done before.
But Saul did not keep his promise. One day, as David played the harp for Saul, Saul threw a spear at him. David escaped. He told Jonathan what had happened. "That can't be," Jonathan said. "It's true," David replied. "How can I help?" Jonathan asked. David came up with a plan to figure out how Saul felt about David.
The new moon festival's tomorrow, David explained. I'm supposed to be at the meal, but I'm not going. If Saul asks where I am, tell him I asked for your permission to go to Bethlehem. If he gets angry, you will know he wants to kill me. Jonathan told David that he would give him a sign to show how Saul responded. Jonathan would shoot 3 arrows. Then he would send his servant to get the arrows. If David was safe, Jonathan would say, "The arrows are to the side of you." But if Saul wanted to kill David, Jonathan would say, "The arrows are beyond you."
So Jonathan went to the new moon festival with his father. When Saul sat down to eat, he asked, "Where's David?" "David is in Bethlehem. I gave him permission to go," Jonathan said. Saul became angry. "David deserves to die," he yelled. "Why?" Jonathan asked. "What has he done wrong?" Saul threw his spear at Jonathan, and Jonathan left the table. He was sad that his father wanted to kill David.
The next morning, Jonathan went to the field where David was hiding. He shot 3 arrows and sent his servant to retrieve them. "The arrow is beyond you," Jonathan shouted. That meant Saul wanted to kill David. Jonathan sent his servant away, and David came out from where he was hiding. David was so sad. David and Jonathan cried and said their goodbyes. "Take care of yourself," Jonathan said. The 2 men parted ways. No matter what, they would always be friends.
Jonathan was a true friend to David. Jonathan's life gives us a glimpse of Jesus, the mighty friend of sinners. Jesus calls us friends. John 15:15. He gave up his position in heaven to come down to us, gave up his life to save us, and intercedes for us before God.
Wow, Jonathan was a very good friend. What kinds of things does a good friend do? We have a great friend. His name is Jesus. He is the friend of sinners. And Jesus left heaven to come to us, and he died to save us.